The rain had just let up when I pulled into the gravel lot. The Bayview Fishing Lodge Motel sign flickered like it hadn't been fixed since the 90s. I parked the van under a leaning pine tree, engine ticking as I killed it. The divorce papers sat in the glove box like a dead weight, already signed and sealed, finalized that morning at the courthouse back in Portland. My name's Nathaniel. I'm 38 years old, born and raised in Rockland, Maine. I fix boat engines for a living, mostly lobster boats, sometimes sailboats in the summer. I've always been better with things that break because they have a reason, a part that fails, a bolt that slips. People, on the other hand, people just unravel. I stepped inside the motel lobby, dripping slightly onto the faded tile floor. The air smelled like coffee and sea air, and that strange musk motels always have no matter how clean they are. The woman behind the counter looked up from a crossword puzzle. She had brown hair tucked into a loose bun and wore a gray cardigan that looked soft enough to sleep in. Her name tag said Carly. "Room for one?" she asked, voice low and unbothered. I nodded. "Just for a few nights." She eyed me, not in a judgmental way, more like she was taking inventory. I must have looked tired. I felt tired. My eyes burned from the salt air, or maybe the crying I hadn't quite done yet. "Been a long day?" she asked, sliding a key across the counter. It was a real metal key, not one of those plastic cards. "Yeah, you could say that." She paused, then said, "Some endings are just honesty in disguise." I looked up. That was it. No follow-up, no pitying smile. Just the sentence, dropped like a stone in water. It landed harder than anything Marla had said during the divorce. That woman had yelled, sure, but mostly she'd looked at me like she'd already packed her soul and moved out a year ago. Carly's words hit like a truth I hadn't been ready to admit. I took the key. "Thanks." She nodded and went back to her puzzle. Room 11 was around the side, upstairs. I climbed the weathered steps and unlocked the door. The room smelled faintly of lemon cleaner. Nothing fancy. Bed, nightstand, a small table near the window that looked out over the gray harbor. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at my boots. The silence was thick, the kind that creeps into your ribs and settles there. For the first time in a long while, there was no one waiting for me to come home, no half-finished dinner in the microwave, no sound of Marla brushing her teeth and shutting the bathroom door a little too hard. It wasn't that she'd left me, not really. The truth was, she'd left a long time ago. Her body stayed. Her words still came in sentences, but her eyes didn't see me. She'd disappeared piece by piece, like driftwood washing out to sea. And I hadn't stopped her. I had just kept fixing engines, paying bills, assuming marriage was supposed to feel like maintenance. Carly's voice echoed in my head. Some endings are just honesty in disguise. Maybe this was honesty. Maybe I had been pretending longer than I'd realized. I lay back on the bed fully clothed, staring at the ceiling. The rain started up again, tapping the window pane like it was trying to remind me of something. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just lay there with the weight of silence. And for the first time in months, it felt real. It felt earned. Whatever came next, at least it would be mine. It happened about a year before the motel. I came home late, not unusual for a Thursday. A 12-hour shift at the marina, fighting with a seized-up diesel block in an old crabber named Lucky Sam. My hands were sore, back stiff, clothes reeking of salt, grease, and exhaustion. I remember unlocking the front door and thinking how quiet the house was. No TV, no dishes clinking in the sink, no faint hum of Marla's old record player. Just silence. The living room was dim, lit only by the lamp in the corner. Marla was sitting on the couch, upright and still. She had on one of those office blouses she wore to the bank, cream-colored with little buttons. Her makeup was perfect, hair pinned neatly. She looked like she was waiting for a client. "Hey," I said, setting my keys in the bowl. "You eat already?" She didn't answer right away. I turned toward her. She was holding an envelope in both hands. Thick, white, lawyer-looking. "What's that?" Marla looked at me, her face unreadable. Then she said, calm as a bank teller counting cash, "I want a divorce." I didn't say anything. She stood up slowly, walked over, and placed the envelope on the table between us like she was delivering a transaction. "It's all there. I've already signed it." Her voice was even. Practiced. She'd rehearsed this. "I'm not mad," she added. "I'm just done, Nathaniel. I've been done." That part hit harder than the word divorce. I swallowed. "So that's it." Marla tilted her head, almost like she pitied me. "You knew this was coming. We haven't been married in a long time." I looked at the envelope. It sat there like a dead thing. I wanted to scream, or cry, or ask why she didn't talk to me first, but none of it came out. I just nodded once. She gave a polite, almost relieved smile, then walked upstairs. I stood there for a long time before I moved. Later that night, I went into the garage. Not to fix anything. There was nothing broken I could fix. I just needed somewhere that didn't echo so loud with her absence. I sat on the folding chair next to the old tool chest. The smell of motor oil clung to the air, thick and familiar. I stared at the wall where my fishing rods hung in a neat row. I hadn't touched them in months. There was no yelling, no thrown dishes or slammed doors. Just the sound of my own heartbeat in my ears and the whir of the beer fridge humming quietly in the corner. How do you react to someone calmly removing you from their life? I kept thinking maybe I missed a sign. But the truth was, I saw it. I just didn't want to admit what it meant. Love didn't vanish in a fight. It disappeared slowly, buried under missed dinners, quiet resentment, and two people who stopped seeing each other across the table. That night, I stayed in the garage until after midnight, just listening to the silence. Not trying to fix it, not trying to chase her upstairs, just trying to understand how something so permanent could slip away without even making a sound. The thing about distance is, you don't always feel it at first. It doesn't announce itself with a bang. It shows up quiet, like a slow leak under the sink. One day the floor's just wet, and you don't remember when it started. It began with Marla working late. She said the bank was understaffed, that she was picking up extra hours. At first, I didn't question it. She'd always been ambitious, efficient, polished, the kind of person who color-coded her planner. She liked being good at things, and she was good at her job. But it started happening more and more. Friday nights especially. I'd come home to an empty house, leftovers in the fridge with a sticky note that said, "Don't wait up." No kiss, no call, just a message like I was her roommate. The changes were small but sharp. Her hair used to be soft and pulled back in a clip. Suddenly, she started blow-drying it straight, using some kind of product that smelled like citrus and cost more than I wanted to know. Her nails were always done, her heels taller. She swapped out our old flannel sheets for some silky, set she said felt more adult, and she started buying wine I couldn't pronounce. I remember the first time I asked her, "You seeing someone?" She didn't even flinch, just looked up from her phone and said, "No. Why would you ask that?" I shrugged. "You're never home. You don't talk to me." Marla rolled her eyes. "I'm working overtime, Nathaniel. You want a house and a retirement plan, right?" I didn't answer because that wasn't the question I had asked. A few weeks later, she came home late again. It was past midnight. I was still up, half watching a fishing show on mute just to hear something besides the buzz of the light. She came in, tossed her purse on the table, and kicked off her shoes. "You know," I said carefully, "most people stop working after 12 hours. Unless they're saving lives." She didn't even look at me. "You think I like being at that place all night?" "I think you like being anywhere but here." That got her attention. Marla turned toward me, eyes sharp. "You think I want to come home to this? A quiet house, dinner by myself, a husband who smells like boat fuel and can't hold a conversation longer than a weather report?" I blinked. Where the hell is that coming from? She crossed her arms. "You think this life is enough for me? You fix motors and take home enough to cover bills, and that's it. No spark, no ambition. It's like being married to a waiting room." I just stared at her, not because I was mad, but because I didn't recognize the woman talking to me. "Not really. You used to like this life?" I said, voice low. "You used to talk about raising kids, building something small but solid." "That was before I realized small means stuck," she snapped. "I feel trapped here, Nathaniel." We didn't talk much after that. She stopped going out on Fridays, but it wasn't because she wanted to be with me. She stayed home, yes, but she stayed cold. The couch might as well have been an ocean between us. We ate dinner without looking up. We fell asleep on opposite sides of the bed. Touch became rare. Eye contact became strained. It wasn't a fight. It was a slow death, a steady unraveling. And every night I lay in bed beside her, staring at the ceiling, wondering how a marriage could keep breathing when all the air had left the room. The first time I saw the lake house after she brought it up, I couldn't even look at it the same way. It was this modest A-frame cabin, built off a gravel road 2 hours inland, right on the edge of Sebago Lake. We'd started it together 5 summers ago, me handling the deck, the plumbing, the paneling, Marla picking out paint swatches and light fixtures from catalogs. She used to call it her peace place. Back then, we thought it'd be a weekend getaway, a future family spot, maybe even a retirement cabin. Now it was a battleground. I sat in my lawyer's office, watching her expression as she slid her paperwork across the table. She wasn't angry. She wasn't nervous. She was firm, polished, detached, just like when she told me she wanted out. I guess that was her thing. Make it look like business so it didn't feel like loss. "I want the lake house," she said flatly. My lawyer shifted in his seat. "We believe the house should be listed and the value split." My client contributed significant. Marla cut in. "He can keep the tools, the van, the garage stuff. I just want the lake house." I didn't say anything right away. I stared down at the grain of the table. Part of me wanted to argue, wanted to tell her that we built that place together, that I poured every weekend, every scraped knuckle and sunburn into that structure, that it was supposed to be ours. But I didn't fight, because deep down, I knew she wasn't asking for the lake house out of sentiment. She wanted it because it was the only thing we built that looked like the dream she still wanted to sell, a curated, tidy version of the life we never really had. The picture-perfect retreat, the one you could show off. I'll sign it over, I said quietly. My lawyer turned toward me. Nathaniel. It's fine, I said more firmly. Let her have it. Marla didn't even blink. That night, I started packing. I didn't bother with most of the furniture. She'd already made a list of what she was keeping, a neat little inventory of separation. I went through drawers and found old fishing maps, faded photos from the first summer we spent at the lake, a set of mugs with faded gold rims, still chipped from when we moved them into the cabin together. I kept a few things that mattered, my grandfather's tackle box, a couple of rods, some carved wood scraps I never got around to finishing. The rest, I left behind. I loaded up the van, tools, camping gear, my retirement paperwork. I tossed in my journal, too. I hadn't written in it in years, but something told me I might need to again. And just before I left, I stood in the kitchen one last time, staring at the empty counter where Marla used to set her coffee every morning. The silence was full, but it wasn't angry. It just was. When I locked the door and drove off, there wasn't any dramatic goodbye. No looking back. No last-minute tears. Just the sound of tires on gravel and the dull weight of letting go. Let her have the lake house. She could keep the view. I was keeping the peace. The mornings came quiet at the lodge. I started waking up earlier than I had in years, without an alarm, without anything pulling me up except the slow tug of the tide outside my window. The air always smelled like salt and pine needles. A gull or two would call out now and then, but mostly it was just still. At first, I didn't know what to do with the silence. That first week, I spent a lot of time just sitting, watching the dock, walking along the edge of the marina, hands in my jacket pockets, counting how many steps it took to get from the old lobster shack to the pile of crab traps near the pier. It was a small lodge, maybe 10 rooms total, mostly occupied by old fishermen or quiet travelers passing through. Nobody really talked much, and I liked it that way. Carly, the receptionist, didn't push either. She'd offer coffee in the mornings, nod hello when I passed the front desk, sometimes leave a fresh towel outside my door when storms rolled in off the bay. One afternoon, it started raining hard. Sheets of water came in sideways. I was sitting under the covered deck outside the back of the lodge, just watching the clouds shift and swell over the water. That's when Carly appeared. She didn't say a word, just sat down beside me on the bench, her sweater sleeves pulled over her hands, her legs crossed at the ankle. We watched the storm together for maybe 30 minutes, and neither of us spoke. Not once. It was the best conversation I'd had in months. A few days later, I found an old notebook in the bottom of my duffel. No idea why I brought it. I started writing again. Not anything fancy, just thoughts, memories, bits and pieces of what I didn't want to lose to time. Soon after, I found a little hardware store in town and bought a small pocket knife and some sandpaper. I hadn't carved wood since I was a teenager, but I picked up a few blocks of cedar and started again. Nothing special, fish, birds, shapes with no names. Just enough to keep my hands busy when the days stretched long. By the second week, I had a rhythm. Coffee in the morning, walks down the pier, a little carving, a little writing. Sometimes a boat engine would backfire out in the harbor, and I'd flinch instinctively, like I should be working. But I didn't have to anymore. I didn't know anyone a thing. Carly stayed a constant. Never too close, never too far. One morning, she slipped an extra pack of sugar next to my coffee and said, "You look like you needed it today." That was it. And one night, after dinner, I found her sitting on the dock bench alone. She didn't look over as I approached, just patted the spot beside her. I sat. We listened to the waves lap at the pilings. I didn't need to fill the silence. It had stopped being a burden. It had become a friend. In that space, between words, between grief and healing, I found something I hadn't felt in years. Stillness. And maybe, the beginning of home. It was a Tuesday afternoon, late spring, when the truth came out. I was sitting outside the tackle shop in town, finishing a cup of gas station coffee, when I heard someone call my name. I looked up and saw Tony, an old acquaintance from the marina. We'd worked side by side on and off over the years, usually on older trawlers or when someone needed an extra set of hands. He looked surprised to see me. "Damn, Nathaniel. I heard you went ghost." "Yeah," I said. "Needed a break." He nodded like he understood. "You staying over at that fishing lodge? Carly's place?" I nodded back. "For a while now." He leaned against the post beside the bench and sipped his Coke. "I always figured you and Marla were gonna last forever." Looked solid from the outside. I didn't answer. I wasn't in the habit of explaining my marriage to people anymore. Then Tony said, "You know she was running around, right? With that guy from the bank?" My head turned so fast it made my neck pop. What guy? He blinked like he hadn't meant to drop a bomb. Thought you knew. I mean, it was pretty well known around the marina. Guy's name was Kyle, I think. Ran a business account through the bank. Owned a couple of tourist rentals up near Camden. Real slick type. Expensive shoes, fake smile. I felt something twist in my chest. When Tony scratched his chin. I don't know, a year and a half ago? Maybe more? She used to say she was working late, but I saw her getting into his truck behind O'Hara's once. It wasn't subtle. I sat back hard against the bench, my coffee cooling fast in my hand. I figured you knew, he said, quieter now. Didn't mean to blindside you. I shook my head, mostly to myself. It makes sense. I just never saw it written out in plain view before. Tony frowned. Look, man, I don't think she was trying to hurt you. I think she thought that guy was her way out. Heard he dumped her not long after the divorce went through. Of course he did. Yeah. Guess she figured out not all shiny things stick around. We talked for a few more minutes. Then he headed off toward his truck, but I didn't move. I sat there with the weight of it pressing down on me. Not the betrayal, not even the anger. Just the strange, hollow kind of validation. Like someone finally turned on the light in a room I'd been stumbling through for too long. The overtime shifts. The distance. The contempt. She had already made her decision long before she handed me that envelope. I wasn't the reason she left. I was just the backdrop. I thought it would hurt more. But sitting there, with the wind off the water and the gulls circling over the bait pier, all I felt was confirmation. She didn't leave because of me. She left because she thought someone else could offer her something better. And in the end, he didn't. But I was still here. And finally, I didn't need to understand her choices to be free of them. I started therapy 2 months after the conversation with Tony. It wasn't some dramatic breaking point. No meltdown. No panic attack. Just a moment one morning, staring at my reflection in the bathroom mirror of the lodge, toothbrush in hand, realizing I didn't recognize the man looking back. Not because he was broken, because he was quieter, calmer, but still unsure of who he was without the marriage, the house, the dream that had never quite been his. Carly was the one who mentioned the therapist. She didn't push, just left a folded brochure on the bench one evening. Local guy, good with people who don't talk much. I looked at her. That obvious? She smiled. Only a little. So I went. Once a week, just to see. The therapist was an older man named Dennis who wore wool sweaters year-round and always had peppermint tea brewing. He asked questions slowly. Let silences breathe. I like that. The first few sessions, I kept it surface level. Talked about the divorce, the lake house, how it all unraveled. Then, during the 4th session, he said something that stuck. You know, Dennis said, you talk a lot about what happened to you, but not much about what you wanted. I sat with that, because the truth was, I hadn't thought about what I wanted in years. I had been so busy trying to hold the marriage together, patching leaks, filling gaps. I never asked myself if I even liked the structure I was protecting. Dennis helped me unearth the quiet guilt I'd carried. For being content with a modest life. For not dreaming bigger. For being the kind of man who could be replaced by a client with a nicer watch and a newer truck. We dug into that guilt until it lost its shape. I didn't fail her, I said one day, surprised to hear myself believe it. I just wasn't what she wanted. That's not the same as failing. Dennis nodded. Exactly. That was the shift. I stopped wondering what I could have done differently. I stopped replaying the arguments, the cold silences, the night in the garage. Instead, I started asking myself better questions. What do I want? What do I need? The answers were simple. Peace. Truth. People who didn't need me to be shinier or louder to be seen. That weekend, I asked Carly if she wanted to grab coffee on Sunday. She raised an eyebrow. Like, coffee that isn't from the motel lobby? I nodded. Thought we could try being people who eat muffins and sit across from each other. She grinned. Sounds dangerous. We didn't make it a date. Not officially. We just sat by the window at a little place on the harbor, watching the boats go by, talking about nothing urgent. She told me about her hometown in Vermont. I told her about the first boat engine I ever fixed. It was easy. Uncomplicated. We started meeting like that every Sunday. No pressure. No promises. Just 2 people, learning to be still without being stuck. I didn't know where it was going. But for once, I didn't need to. I didn't crave certainty. I didn't need to be chosen to feel worth something. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't chasing love. I was building something steadier. Myself. Sunday mornings were different now. I'd moved into a modest apartment just outside of town. 2nd floor, 2 rooms, tiny balcony with a crooked railing that overlooked the harbor. The place was nothing fancy. Linoleum floors, older appliances, but the light in the morning made the kitchen glow, and that was enough. I kept things simple. A couch, a worn recliner, the coffee table I'd built from reclaimed oak. My journal sat on the windowsill beside a half-carved driftwood gull. There was peace in the unfinished. That morning, I sat on the balcony with a mug in my hand, the steam rising in soft spirals. The tide was low. A few sailboats rocked lazily on their moorings, the water glittering in spots where the sun broke through the clouds. I heard her footsteps before I saw her. Carly appeared in the doorway, hair still damp from the shower, sleeves pushed up. She didn't speak, just handed me a second mug and sat beside me, tucking her legs beneath her. No fanfare, no declarations, just warmth. We sipped in silence, watching the water. Somewhere down the street, a gull cackled, and a dog barked back. The world carried on. I thought about the man I'd been, the version of me that held everything in, who thought endurance was love, who mistook silence for peace. The guy who believed that staying, even in emptiness, meant success. He'd tried. He had grit. But he didn't know how to ask for anything. Not until the asking was too late. And then there was the man I was now. Still healing. Still quiet. But no longer invisible to himself. I looked over at Carly. She caught my eye and smiled. Not the kind you give to be polite, but the soft, steady kind that says, I see you. You don't have to perform. I didn't know if I'd ever marry again. Maybe I would. Maybe I wouldn't. That didn't feel like a failure anymore. Love wasn't a finish line. It wasn't a house or a lake view or a framed wedding photo. It was this, a mug passed from one hand to another. A shared silence that didn't demand filling. Carly leaned her head lightly on my shoulder. I felt it. Not like weight, but like anchor. I took a breath and looked out over the water. For the first time in years, I wasn't searching. I'd already found it. Not a person, not a place, but a compass. And it pointed here. To stillness. To honesty. To the quiet kind of love that doesn't have to prove itself to belong. To myself. At last,